This is apropos. A protege of Martin Luther King Jr. and two-time presidential candidate. He led the US civil rights movement for decades and was one of America's most influential black voices. Tributes are pouring in tonight for the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's died at the age of 84. Many who knew and worked with him are vowing to keep hope alive in honour of his legacy. With more on the reaction to his passing, here's Monty Francis.
When Barack Obama won the presidential election in 2008, becoming the United States' first black president, it was enough to bring Jesse Jackson to tears. It was a moment Jackson himself had paved the way for. He ran for president twice in the 1980s and was the first African American to have significant success at the ballot box. In a statement, Obama wrote, "Michelle and I were deeply saddened to hear about the passing of a true giant," adding, "We stood on his shoulders."
Jesse Jackson changed American politics. He was a consequential and transformative figure.
Kamala Harris, the first black woman to become vice president, said in a statement, "Reverend Jesse Jackson was one of America's great patriots. He spent his life summoning all of us to fulfill the promise of America and building the coalitions to make the promise real." Friends and supporters also paid tribute outside the headquarters of Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition in Chicago.
I felt like he was like family. I mean, he did a lot of things for me and the community as well.
What I am somebody means is that all you have to do is just keep pushing. Keep pushing. And that's what Jesse taught us.
In a statement, former President Bill Clinton said that Jesse Jackson championed human dignity, and former President Joe Biden described Jackson as a man of God and of the people. For his part, President Trump wrote of Jackson, "He was a good man with lots of personality, grit, and street smarts." Jackson was a protege of the civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. and was at his side when King was assassinated in 1968. King's daughter, Bernice, called Jackson a courageous bridge builder, posting a photo of her father and Jackson with the caption, "Both now ancestors."
For more on the Reverend's life and legacy, we're joined by Gloria Browne-Marshall, civil rights attorney, law professor, founder of At the Law and Policy Group, and also author of several books, including the latest, A Protest History of the United States. Gloria, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. So Jesse Jackson, we heard it there in that report, he was there during many consequential moments in the long battle for racial justice in the US. How, for you, will he be remembered?
Well, I remember the first time I ever saw him in person, I was in high school. And I remember him speaking as an invited speaker at my high school that was majority white. And by the end of his speech, we were all standing up and cheering and shouting out, "I am somebody," and "Keep hope alive." And that's what really was the first impression of a civil rights activist to me. I'd seen civil rights attorneys and even had one in my family, but to see a civil rights activist, to understand that they have to bring together your emotions and your head, your heart and your head. It's not just the practical and the logical, but the hope, and that's what he represented. And that's what I think about in the times that we were on panels together and had conversations, was that he kept that spirit the entire time into his 80s. He was spirited. I saw him a few years ago, and even though he was ill, he still had that boyish smile and that spirit and that sense of hope.
And tribute's been paid to him today from right across the political spectrum. We saw Barack Obama there, Donald Trump also talking about his legacy. How do you think, and can you tell us a little bit about how Jesse Jackson reshaped American history and diplomacy?
Back in 1968, when King was assassinated, the sense that the civil rights movement had lost its greatest leader, or the greatest leader of the 20th century, and that it was now flailing. Who was going to move forward? But Jesse Jackson was a young person in that group of elders. And so he picked up the baton and he carried it into the 70s and 80s. And then he looked at the political spectrum and said, wait a minute, we're not just going to be third-party candidates. We should also go for the mainstream nominations for the Democratic presidency. And he did that. And he walked the walk and he talked the talk. And what I mean is, poverty. He grew up in poverty and stark poverty. And he understood that poverty, once you take away race, is something that no one wants to live with. And so he was able to speak across racial lines, religious lines. He was able to speak across ethnicities and regions of the country because America is very truly divided in classism and regions and dialects. And so he was able to span the country, speaking of people having a better life. And with that message, he not only became a viable political candidate, but became somebody who could voice the concerns of the people in a way nationally that others had not been able to do in the same way.
And what kind of difference did he make to Black voters more generally? He's credited with helping to register millions of them.
Because of the message of hope. When he spoke at the Democratic National Committee, he spoke there in a way that said that even if you have nothing, you have hope always. You may not have the material means, but you have hope. And with that hope, you can keep pushing forward. And that's why it was Operation Push, that he would continue to have people push for their dreams, to keep a dream alive under such harsh circumstances sometimes in a country that has so much, and yet you see all the country has. And if you're born into poverty, if you're living where you have limited resources, then it's easy to give up and feel angry that all of this great wealth is for others and not for you. And what he said to young Black voters and young voters across the country, that you can create your own dream. You can carve your own place out of this country. You don't have to follow the very path that everyone else followed. Look at me. I was born in poverty and look where I am now. And being a reverend and having that pulpit, having to be this great orator, having learned from other great orators like King, how to feel the audience's pain and express it in a way that still gives them hope. That's what he was able to do with young people. And that's why the people decided to vote. They might have thought he may not win, but they had the hope that he would.
And Gloria, his death, of course, comes at a very particular moment in US history. Donald Trump, of course, cracking down on immigration, on diversity. Are Jesse Jackson's aspirations and also his frustrations, are they as relevant now as they were when he was starting out in activism?
I think his death is going to push people to realize that we cannot rely on the work and sacrifices of other generations, that we have to push forward, have a vision forward. And that vision, in my estimation, is democracy, diversity, literacy, and health. Those four pillars, because diversity has been a part of this country for before this country even existed. Africans were in North America in the 1600s and even the 1500s. So to deny diversity is deny that this country has been as diverse with Latinos, with people from different parts of Europe. So we need to restart and give more energy to the protests that are taking place, pushing back against Donald Trump and his regime, and letting people know the power of the people. And that's what Jesse Jackson had. He understood the power of the people. Yes, there can be lawsuits. Yes, you can have politicians, but the power of the people is great. And he harnessed that. And I think that his death is going to trigger the harnessing of the power of the people again for us to go forward with a vision of this country, a diverse country, and not one that's just run by oligarchs.
And, you know, the success largely of the civil rights movement, it was about convincing American society that racism essentially and discrimination are wrong. Is that still the case in the Trump era?
I think having seen the horrible depictions that came out of the White House of President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama, I'm not even going to go into the details. I'm sure it made global news. Then we know that this regime has a racist bent, that we've seen hundreds of thousands of Black employees lose their jobs in the federal government. We know that Barack Obama and his regime have this penchant, obsessed jealousy with the success of Barack Obama. We know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is targeted because it is assisted African Americans, but also African Americans have worked so hard against all odds to be in positions of success. And that jealousy of our progress, despite all the obstacles that we still face, is something that I think is a target, that progress of this administration. And I think we need that keep our hope alive, know that our ancestors and people like Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King, and others in the civil rights movement had to withstand more using less, but they had the power of the people, they had the power of hope. And the other thing about Jesse Jackson, he was a strategist, he was a tactician. He also could go into boardrooms as well as into the pool hall. He could talk to all different types of people. And I think to get people power now and to bring people together, we need leaders who can talk to all different types of people where they stand and understand that this country is a diverse place and we cannot undermine diversity and try to appease this administration. You cannot appease a dictator, and giving away the progress of Black people, hoping to appease this dictatorship, is not going to win in the end, but it will hurt Black progress even more. And so I think in the name of Jesse Jackson, we need to hold on to that progress, have allies that can come together and do what we need to do to maintain a positive democracy and direction in this country. And I think Jesse Jackson's death is going to make us rethink that some people have stayed in the background on the sidelines. I think his death is going to cause them to say, it's time for me to step into the fray. It's time for me to do what I need to do, just like Jesse Jackson did.
Gloria, we'll have to leave it there for now. We do really appreciate your time on the programme. Thanks so much for joining us. That is Gloria Browne-Marshall, civil rights attorney, law professor and author. Thanks so much.